Welcome everybody to Spectrum Art Gallery, Friday Photography Live. We have Helen Gigliotti making her presentation. So without further ado, Helen.
In 1979, I did a trip to Alaska. I decided, well, maybe last summer would be a good time to do it again and see how it had changed. But I want to kind of take you on a journey. We're going to go up to the Hazelton area first. This is the RV that we traveled in. A nice, small, compact unit. So we were able to really park as a car. Hazelton is an area where the Tlingit people have settled. Each town has its own collection of totems. Many of them have a family crest up on top of a totem, and all the little villages have their own tribal house. And these people are very dependent on the salmon runs. In the area, there are a lot of little churches that were founded about the turn of the century. This is an Anglican church out in the countryside and a replica of the original bell tower. Heading on north to Hyder-Stewart area and the Portland Canal, a way in which the miners could get access to the silver mines in the northern part of British Columbia. Right across the border is Hyder, Alaska, which you must go to. Hyder, Alaska is a ghost town. The only thing that you see there are a couple little restaurants, and there's some curio shops. And I love this exotic junk. Fish Creek. And, in the latter part of the summer, in early fall, there's a salmon run, and the bears come down. And so the Forest Service had built a viewing platform so you can safely watch. Following the river emanating from the glacier, lots of ptarmigan or grouse by the side of the road. They wouldn't even move for you. And you begin to get into some of the beautiful wildflowers that exist in this part of Canada. And finally, you get to Salmon Glacier. It's the 5th largest glacier in Canada. We stayed at this wonderful, wonderful campground RV park. As we were going through the northern part of British Columbia, bears were everywhere, it seemed like. Up in Whitehorse, there are 2 places you need to stop at. The first is this brand new interpretive center called Beringia. Well, about 20,000 years ago, northern part of North America was in the Ice Age. This exposed the shallow sea shelf between Alaska here and Siberia. And this area then across here is called Beringia. It's one of the ways in which humans and animals migrated from the old world across to the new world. Also in Whitehorse, you have to go to the Frantic Follies, vaudeville follies that the old gold miners engaged in, toward Dawson City, and you begin to get into the real high Klondike gold rush country, where the Klondike River joins the Yukon River, and that's the center of the main gold rush that occurred in the late 1800s into the early 1900s. Moose Creek Lodge was a lodge that we stopped at in 1979, and it's still in existence. And it looks just like it did in 1979. Now, this is now one of many roadhouses that you encounter on the highway. What you see here is the evidence of all the hydraulic mining that's occurred in this area. So Dawson City, a tourist attraction because of the remnants of the gold rush, but also The whole area around it is just gorgeous. It's the Yukon River, and the scenery is majestic. And you can see typically the curio shops, the souvenir shops, and all the restaurants. This is a great old building that is sitting on permafrost. And over the years, the melting, the thawing of the permafrost has caused it to sink in very unique ways. So we have this whole issue of historic preservation. Buildings like this, you know, and in another couple of years won't be there. St. Andrew's Church, built at the turn of the century, 1901, is all boarded up and is crying for restoration. Some of the homes are duded up really well. The people, they do take pride. An old settlers cemetery, which is fascinating. There are miners from all over the world that are depicted. Diamond-toothed gerties. In 1979, it was the only gambling hall in all of Canada. The proceeds from the gambling were used for historic preservation. But I remember that we walked out at 2 o'clock in the morning and we all felt very guilty because we had won rather than lost. You can see that gold mining is alive and well. Dredge number 4. This is a National Historic Site. It was the largest gold mining dredge in the world. The gravel would be deposited on both sides of the creek. The deposits look like this scallop pattern, and they give tours of the interior of this and describe the whole operation of the dredge. And then, of course, there were the people who were attracted here just because it was a romantic thing to be engaged in, like Robert Service. We're about to cross the Yukon River and head up into Alaska. People wait hours and hours and hours to get across. The fog came in, the rain started pelting down. We ended up in roads like this. Somehow we made it to the border station. Some gorgeous scenery along the way. And the roads, because of the rain, the streams are washing out the roads. Lots of gold mining activity as you follow the streams. And finally we get to Chicken, Alaska. And these people, there are not very many people who live here because it's not a very big town, but they sure do have a sense of humor. The early miners, when they moved into this area, there were ptarmigan all over the place, grouse. And so they wanted to name it ptarmigan, but nobody knew how to spell it. So they decided to call it Chicken instead. There's not much to the town. There's a couple dredges, and enjoy the signs, like I got laid in Chicken, Alaska. Like Chicken, Alaska, clucking good time. We start getting into the grand mountain scenery and the rivers emanating from the glaciers. And these roadhouses were to serve the miners. This is taken from a hill at the University Fairbanks, overlooking the valley. It has some really beautiful architecture. This is the museum of the university. This is an old bison that was mummified, that was dug out of the permafrost. It's about 35,000 years old. It's heading south. There's a section of the Alaska pipeline. Continually, the roads are being redone. And you encounter, wildlife periodically. We get to Denali. Finally, it cleared up a little bit, and we were able to get into the park and enjoy some of the scenery. The rivers emanating from the glaciers. Grizzly bears in Denali are a subspecies of grizzly, and they all have this very characteristic tan color. We did see some male moose with beautiful racks. Lots of caribou, herds of caribou. all over the place. A red fox that followed the bus down the road. And finally we get to Alson Visitor Center. And up here is supposed to be Denali, the highest peak in North America. As we got out on the highway, and Denali was out in all its glory. The wildflowers were out after a fresh rain. They were particularly gorgeous. And just outside of Anchorage, we encountered this historical park called Eklutna. This is a small Orthodox church that was built fairly recently. The old one is in great disrepair. What was interesting about this site was not the church, but the cemetery. The people who lived in this area were the Athabascans. Their tradition when their people died was to build over the gravesite a spirit house. So the spirit leaving the dead body would have a place to reside. So this practice was blessed, essentially, by the missionaries, and they continued to practice this. Okay, from Anchorage, we're heading down into the Kenai Peninsula. Turnagain Arm is an inlet of the Cook Inlet. These waterways are subject to tidal variations. In fact, the second greatest tidal variations in North America to the Bay of Fundy. And so you get times when the mudflats are completely exposed. Hope is an old gold rush town that actually was created before Dawson City and before Nome, Alaska. So I enjoy driving around this area and looking at the cabins that are remnants of the old days. This person really duded up their place. Oh, and black-billed magpies are everywhere, just everywhere. This print is on the wall here. I like this one. I call this the Organic International because of the moss growing on it. But a few Quonset huts because these are remnants of the World War II activity. And this fellow's very proud of the bearskin that he collected years ago. So from Hope, past Turn Lake, fireweed. This is like the flower of Alaska. The wild spirea, I really like this too. It's gorgeous. Various kinds of columbine. The Kenai River is world-renowned for salmon fishing. We visited the oldest Russian Orthodox church on the mainland and the cemetery across the way. Right down at the tip of the Kenai Peninsula. This is our campsite. This whole spit is just lined with curio shops, souvenir shops, restaurants, one of the volcanoes of Katmai National Park. Of course, there's a great fishing economy and the remnants of past days. Lots of these kinds of shops and cafes. Particularly in the latter part of the year, there are a lot of bald eagles there. And we realized that Mom or Pop was protecting this nest. From Homer, we took the Alaskan ferry overnight over to Kodiak Island. We hired 2 float planes. That's a beautiful trip in itself because Kodiak Island is just full of lakes and inlets and bogs and marshes and high mountain peaks. The deltas formed by the streams coming out. The salmon are coming in here, and they're trying to get up the falls along this small creek to the place where they were born so they can lay their eggs. To help them get up the falls, they built a fish ladder. You land on the lake, and then you hike in a short ways. You come upon the fish ladder here, and you can see the Kodiak bears. Now, the Kodiak bears are the size of polar bears. And the other way in which they fish is to go to the ladder, the fish ladder itself. There are holes in the fish ladder, and they can just stick their head down in and catch the fish as they go through. After we play, then we're going to walk off 15 feet from where we were sitting. We came up the hill. Of course, we're accompanied by a guide. Flying back to the town of Kodiak. This is an old fish cannery. The tide is out and the tidal flats are revealed. And occasionally, very far in the distance, those are goats. And our sister playing up here. And the town of Kodiak. This is Kluane Lake, which was gorgeous. In the distance are the St. Elias Mountains. And we were there on an absolutely gorgeous day. Just some beautiful scenery. And the old cabins. As we drove along the road, we encountered this scraggly old male grizzly. He was pretty bad shape. Heading down to Ames. The telephone poles and power lines have a hard time in the permafrost. Tundra swan family. And this is a fort that was constructed back in the gold rush days by the government in order to maintain order with the unruly gold rush miners. It's named after the Seward of Seward's Folly, who was responsible for the purchase of Alaska. During the late fall and the winter, has the highest population of bald eagles in the world. We were not there at that time, but there were still plenty of bald eagles to see. We came across this very interesting salmon weir. It directs the salmon, and so Fish and Game can keep track. They had set aside part of the river for the native people to fish. And you can see that this is tribal territory. We got to the lake, and there were eagles, bald eagles around, and they were way up high, up the top of these Sitka spruce trees. Got this guy a juvenile in the process of changing over to becoming an adult. And this guy right here had caught this salmon, was making sure it was done in, and then grabbing it in its claws and flying off probably to its nest. This one waiting for the fish to go by. As it saw something, it would just jump in with its claws and grab it. And this one hovering up above the water, grabbing it when it saw something. Lots of merganser families and lots of warblers and very thrush. And tons of jays. I had never seen so many jays. We're on the last leg of the trip. So Petersburg and Wrangell are the typical frontier town. Petersburg was founded about 100 years ago by a Norwegian fisherman. It's charming, partly because it's retained its Scandinavian flavor. These are some of the original Gold Rush buildings. Murals are a big thing in these towns. They have mural competitions to see which town is going to be named the mural capital of Alaska. The museum and the replica of the old Viking ship. A lovely town. We really enjoyed this. The old warehouses, Sitka spruce, which is the dominant pine tree in the rainforests of this part. And everybody knows the lichen that you see up in Washington in the rainforests up there. If you go out early in the morning, there's deer running all over the road. One of the reasons for going here was to go out on Frederick Sound. We took a boat that held like 10 passengers, went out to this area that is supposed to have the highest concentration of humpback whales in the world. And one of the things the government people are doing is cataloging the whales from the characteristic markings on their tails. And occasionally you would even get a breach. In Leconte Bay, which precedes the glacier, there are a lot of icebergs, as you'll see here. A few pictures of a few of them. And critters around, harbor seals, and the head of the glacier. We were lucky to see a cat and lots of ice crystals floating on the surface. I was interested in the history of the Leconte Glacier. Since 2004, it hasn't receded at all. So it's being reformed at the same rate as it's calving off icebergs. On to our last stop, this world-famous Anon Bear Observatory. And so we had to get instructions on how to behave. This is the boardwalk that we took in. And, we would encounter Mom and her cub along the way. And these are the falls that these salmon had to go up. I'm up on the deck of the observatory area. And they just walk out into the rapids and catch the fish. So this one is just kind of wading out, sticks its head down when it sees something going by, pulls out a fish, and either eats it on the spot or oftentimes will take it over to the side and eat on the rocks. Here we are in the cracks doing our fishing. And this one is going to go up this log and go find a nice quiet place to eat its fish. And anything left over is awaiting the scavengers and the gulls. Lots of gulls around. Or up the river here came a couple grizzlies. Mom, a sow, and her cub. Mama grizzly fishing, coming out with a flopping big one, taking it over to Junior taking it away and chomping down. Oh, and then it's playtime. And then back to the boat and back to Bellingham, Washington. So that's the end. I hope you enjoyed.